It's Pyram King, and I'm really excited to bring to you another interview for Curse of Straw. But this is a special edition. This is about Ravenloft, and with me today, I have a very special guest, Professor Dungeon Master. How are you doing today?
Terrific. How are you, Pyram King?
I'm doing really, really well. I'm very excited to have you here. I know most of our supporters and watchers know who you are, but could you give us a brief introduction to what Dungeon Craft is, a little bit about yourself before we dive into Ravenloft?
Dungeon Craft is my YouTube channel, and it's called that because I used to do crafting, like physical crafting, and then I also used to craft adventures. And so that's how I came up with the name. And it's since then it's expanded to covering all facets of the industry, including news. And I do commentary and reviews, and that's what Dungeon Craft's about.
Well, I am a huge fan of yours, and it was your Dungeon Craft YouTube channel that really helped me when I got back into D&D. I started playing in the 1980s, obviously played I6 Ravenloft back then, and then, well, life gets in the way, and I missed the third edition, fourth edition. When I came back to the fifth edition, I was kind of lost. A lot changed from that first, second edition to fifth edition. And when I found your YouTube channel, it really bridged that gap. It allowed me to really kind of understand it from both an old school perspective and appreciate both what was going on in 5e. And I think you've hit that sweet spot talking to both the older generation of players and the newer generation players, plus excellent commentary what's going on with Wizards in the Coast and all that crazy stuff, as well as new content. So I love your channel. If you don't watch it, I highly subscribe. I'll put a link in it down below.
Thank you so much.
So before we get into the questions, I think it would be really cool if you shared with all of us your first experience in Ravenloft. Were you a player or a DM, or do you have any interesting stories about your first Ravenloft experience?
1983, we got the module for Halloween. It was advertised in Dragon Magazine, and my friend Ray ran it. And I was a player. I played I think a fighter. And we, I remember that it was a lot of fun. That's no specifics on that, but I remember. And then years later, I read it, and it's one of the greatest adventure modules of all time.
Well, I know you're a Hickman fan. You recommend XDM on your channel. I'm living in Europe, so it's been a little bit harder for me to pick up a copy of that. I'm a big Hickman fan as well, obviously. From Ravenloft, I played it. I was a thief. I think I had 2 hit points. I died. I had to re-roll up another character, which I rolled up a fighter. Did your character make it all the way through Ravenloft, or did it not? Did he not
I
survive?
think so. I think he did, but I can't remember. Back then, the casualty rate was
Very
high.
high.
I remember dying in the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. I don't remember dying in Ravenloft, so maybe we made it out.
I played that next. That's U1, and I played, I think it was U2, which is the Danger of Dunwater.
Dunwater.
But the first one I played was Keep of the Borderlands, and then I saw your review on the Goodman Games version of that. So I rushed out and bought that because I just have such fond memories of the Keep on the Borderlands and the Cave of Chaos. It's such a impactful adventure because you're out of the dungeon, you have that keep, and it was really exciting. One of the things about after I played Ravenloft, I rushed out to the store and picked up a copy of it. And I remember as a teenage kid just staring at that isometric castle, just so fascinating. I'd watch the Bela Lugosi movie, 1931 Dracula. I was trying to imagine where he was in the castle. It was really, really exciting. Do you have any experience or thoughts on the second edition when it came out? I know they really expanded the universe, Forgotten Realms, second edition and third editions. What are your thoughts on those additional expansions?
I like the original expansion. The original Ravenloft expansion was by Bruce Nesmith, who went on to become, I think, the Skyrim guy.
Oh, really? I
If
didn't know
I,
that.
yeah, it's one of those big sort of Elder Scrolls. He became a very big video game designer, and I remember I loved the art and the layout. It was very Hammer horror.
Oh yeah, the old Hammer horror videos and films. It was I think it was Vincent Price that took over Lugosi's role as Dracula, right? Was it Vincent
It's
Price?
Christopher Lee.
Christopher Lee, that's right. Vincent
Yeah.
Price, I think, was also in some Hammer horror films, but it was Christopher Lee that took over the Hammer films. So let's dive into this, and I've broken up the questions into about kind of the theme of what Ravenloft is, and then some player agency, and then I have some really more specifically Professor Dungeon Master Dungeon Craft questions towards the end. So one of the things I think a lot of people have a difficulty wrestling with is that Ravenloft is Gothic horror, and it's a really big departure from the traditional high fantasy that we're used to playing in Dungeons and Dragons. Could you provide us some of your suggestions and tips for establishing a Gothic horror tone and atmosphere to your game?
Okay. So the thing is about Gothic horror, which I taught, like I've taught Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Big fan of Gothic horror. It's not really compatible with D&D rules as written. It never has been because D&D has always been a game about heroic fantasy. Gothic horror does not have heroes. It only has victims. Everyone's a victim. Everyone. So, by the way, happy birthday, Mary Shelley. She was born about 3 days ago.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and she's the architect. She's one of the architects of Gothic horror. And there's no one in Frankenstein who has any. They're all victims. Victor Frankenstein, I mean, he's physically weak. He's no match for the creature. Typically in Gothic fiction, you'll have a heroine who is helpless, and we have that with Elizabeth. But Victor Frankenstein too, he's completely helpless against the monster, and that's what makes it scary. He can't defeat the creature. He can't defeat his own creature. So when you think about Gothic horror, if you're thinking about Poe and the House of Usher, and these are characters who are just the world imposes its will upon them. They don't really have all that much autonomy. They're helpless. That's where that kind of horror comes from. So Dungeons and Dragons has always been about empowerment and leveling up. And so you have to make some serious mods. You have to do some serious hacking of the rules in order to make it work. And I have some ideas. Would you like to hear them?
I would
They're gonna.
definitely like to hear. But before you get into that, one of my thoughts about Gothic horror is there always seems to be an element of also kind of romantic tragedy in a lot of these
Yeah,
cases. If you want to expand on romantic tragedy, I mean, even Strahd with the Irina Tatiana storyline.
yeah, yeah. The Irina Tatiana storyline is very important. That is, Hickman does his best to make it as gothic as possible, and it's the flaw, if any, that you could point out with that module is there's a lot of Dungeons and Dragons conventions. It's like a wandering monster chart with a blue dragon on it. Like
Right.
why?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. But he's very aware. He was super aware. I mean, this is a person that's read Frankenstein, Dracula, and seen the Universal films and the Hammer horror films. So he's very aware of what he's doing. You don't have Ravenloft if you don't have Irina
Right.
and Tatiana. He'd just be a vampire if you didn't have that story. And that's the most. So many. You mentioned the maps of Ravenloft, so innovative, those isometric maps. And they weren't the first ones. That's the Lost City. But they really doubled down on it was all isometric. It looked totally different. And so groundbreaking in a number of ways. And it was written with the Hickman Manifesto, which is you have to have a story outside just killing monsters. Module should have a story that exists outside of that the players can piece together, and they'll have more of an emotional connection to it. So that story is Very important for that module.
So, what were some of your ideas before I interrupted you?
Okay. So this is going to be very radical. I always do the Mists of Ravenloft, but the first thing is you should go through the Mists of Ravenloft with no armor. And I'll give the maybe the players a weapon, but you're going to go in with no armor and you got 10 hit points. So if you have no armor and 10 hit points, now you're a victim. You can keep your spells, you can keep your +5 Holy Avenger, but hit points are the rules say a it's a combination of your skill, your luck, your will to live. Well, you don't have much will to live in Barovia. It's frightening, it's alien, it's foreign to the characters, so they would have fewer hit points. Something like that, or cap them at 20 hit points. Now your players, you don't need a fear mechanic because they're afraid that their character is going to die. And in the original module, there's also a time limit, which is the characters are dead and become ghosts if they don't recover the sun sword or whatever the objective is, the random objective. They have to do it before sunrise.
Right. So they're under
That's
the
a
gun. They're under the gun for sure.
yeah, they're under it's I'm astounded with Dungeons and Dragons game and all role playing games. Game designers, not so much even game designers, but game masters. Like one of the key things they're missing is that stories have timers. You have to have a timer. If you don't, it's got less of a sense of urgency. Just really quick jumping out of this, but think about Lord of the Rings.
Right.
That's got a sense of foreboding and doom. The Hobbit, they're just kind of walking along and the dragon's waiting for them. It's still a great book. I love it. But that's one of the reasons that people have the stronger connection to the Lord of the Rings story. And so timers are really essential. Has to be running out. Otherwise, players take lots of rests. Let's rest. Get our spells back.
I totally agree with that. I like to have some kind of timer element and perhaps even telegraph to the players that if they don't do this or get to the person to the next town in such and such a time, that there is going to be some traumatic event. And I like to layer on top of timers kind of that what I call a Kobayashi Maru scenario, meaning there's no win. It's sort of like you have to imagine there's two NPCs. One's about to fall off the cliff, and the other one's over here dying of poison, and you have to get that guy poisoned within, go get the antidote. But if you do, the other guy's going to fall off the cliff to die. But if you save the guy on the cliff, the other person's going to die of poison. So you're giving these people two choices, but one, there's going to be a sacrifice. And I think that element is important to include, that sacrificial element in something like Ravenloft.
I agree. I once ran a scenario where the party had to decide the villain was going to kill one of two of their favorite NPCs, and they had to vote on which one was going to live and which one's going to die. Well, they were very angry at that guy. They're very angry at that villain. They were angry at me too, but I was like, it's not me. It's an NPC.
So to elaborate on what you're talking about, tension is certainly a key element in any type of horror. Do you have any techniques that a DM can use to ratchet up that tension, other than the timer element throughout the campaign, to maybe show that there's this eventually climatic showdown with Strahd? What kind of tension elements do you think would be good to add to the game?
Well, I hate to go back to the timer, but that's the number one. The idea of it lurking in the back of your mind propels the players forward in such a way that you don't have to. But the other things you could do is you can have other situations, like when I run Castle Ravenloft, I do, there's the players at one point hear a crying baby because that vampire there's a female vampire that lives in the original Ravenloft, and she's going to chow down on this infant, right? And you don't know where it is. It's like the characters are looking for a magic items. They think they're going to kill a vampire. Now you got a baby crying.
Right.
What are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Do we go stick to the main quest, or do we go off on this tangent? And the time is ticking, and you layer things on, and then it gets even more intense.
Absolutely. One of the things that I really enjoy about watching Dungeon Graph is how you go through and you pick out these kind of forgotten little rules or elements. You did a really good one that I really liked about proficiency dice. And so my next question is regarding the intensity of the Gothic horror experience. Are there any maybe dungeon master variant rules or homebrew rules or something on the DMG that you would think like maybe gritty realism or that proficiency dice that you think would be a good mechanic to layer into the game to grab that kind of Gothic horror feeling or essence?
Death at 0 hit points. You're dead.
Absolutely.
You're dead at 0 hit points. You hit zero, you're gone.
One of the things I think in 5e that a lot of people lean on a little bit is the resurrection, which in my guides I've removed all of those spells from it. I don't think
Hmm.
resurrection in there. What's your feeling on resurrection?
It's the worst spell next to wish. And Lamentations of the Flame Princess. That's one of the first things that James Raggy did. He eliminated resurrection. I mean, it is D&D basic set without resurrection. It's if everyone can come back to life, nothing matters.
Right. I guess your decisions really don't have consequences if you can just come back.
No.
I perhaps maybe having resurrection creates this mindset and probably leading to more kind of murder hobo type playing, knowing that well it doesn't matter because I'm just going to come back anyway.
Absolutely. I've never I house rule, I've never played with it. I've never played with it. There, I did have a scenario where a like a mad scientist could brought an NPC back to life,
Right.
but they weren't the same. And
Right.
then when the character, when the characters die, it's like, well, you can always bring them to Dr. Krinkelheim, and they're like, no, 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 we'll stay dead. you
Yeah, well,
know,
that leads me to the question. You've been running a campaign for how many years now? Over a decade, right?
it's 30 years. It began in 1993, so this is 2023. It's 30 years.
And I think if I remember correctly, your characters are I think level 6 or 7, right?
7, 6, and 7, between 5 and 7.
And during that time, have you had character death or new characters or these?
Yeah, only 2 from the original batch survive. We just had a character. My wife played her for about 10 years, and she got skewered. It's
Makes for some
it's
interesting dinner conversation.
that's hey, it wasn't me, it was an NPC. And I roll all the dice in public, and it's like when you roll 2 natural 20s, that's it.
You're
The
done.
dice have written the story.
Game over. So
Yeah.
I do like your proficiency dice mechanic. You mentioned no fear checks, just cap those hit points, keep them low, kind of take off that plot armor as well as maybe physical armor in there. In my guide, what I did is at the very beginning they're camping outside the gates, and the Vistani drug them and steal all their weapons and gear and everything. So they start with absolutely nothing when they go
Mm.
into Ravenloft. It also kind of gets them a little vindictive towards the Vistani. I want to go into player agency, and Ravenloft provides moral dilemmas and tough decisions often arise for characters which we loosely touched on. Any tips for presenting these dilemmas in a way that really tests the characters' values or virtues? A lot of these characters coming in there, and they might be coming in as in a cleric or a paladin or something, and they have these thoughts about their character. How do we test these players' value-oriented decision and virtues in a Gothic horror themed game?
In Gothic horror in general, so there is a Frankenstein type doctor in my game who can bring the dead back to life, and that always ends up in a philosophical discussion with the clerics. At what point do you give up the ghost? And you know, do you do you meddle with those kind of things? With Strahd in the original module, it's written like right into his story, where in the original one of the original playtests, because Hickman, you must know, he tested it for about 5 years, running it on Halloween.
That's right. Rhiannon on Halloween with his wife too,
And
right?
and yeah, with his wife Laura Hickman co-wrote that module. And they had one of the players had the Sun Sword and didn't want to kill Strahd in the end. They felt bad for him.
Right.
They felt bad for him. So, and then that's the question too, is does the paladin show mercy toward this creature if they surrender? You
Right.
know, that's those kind of dilemmas you have to provide them. That's what makes Strahd the great villain he is that there is a reason for him to do what he does. And you could, as my players said, and my players, I I was running for players that didn't play it back in the day, and it was my wife and her friends, and my friend Veronica says, I feel really bad for this guy. It's a shame we have to kill him.
Yeah.
So it's emotionally grounding.
Right. He is
Uh,
certainly an iconic character throughout D&D canon, kind of transcending, as you pointed out, into
mm.
into the realm of Gothic horror that even people that haven't played it can relate to that character from either watching movies or reading books.
What? Yeah, and my feeling is I always start with the villain, and I think, what does this villain want? And in the villain's head, they're the hero. And I often give my villains very tragic backstories, and at some point the player uncovers it, but nevertheless, they're going to come to blows.
Well,
That's what.
well, you do. I will state I do own Macbeth, and so you chosen Shakespeare's Macbeth, which is pretty much the ultimate tragedy as one of your campaigns. It's really good, by the way. I'll put a link in that description down below to Macbeth, which is a great adventure. It seems to me maybe even Shakespeare had some levels in some of his stories, whether it's, I see Strahd a little bit of Richard III in Strahd. There's some Tempest, maybe even some Macbeth, some Shakespearean um, ideas and concepts in Ravenloft.
Shakespeare, you such a genius, and we wouldn't have modern drama without him. And if you look at Shakespeare's villains, if you look at a Shylock like from Merchant of Venice or Aaron in Titus Andronicus, these people, or Iago in Othello, they're evil,
Right.
yet they have redeeming qualities.
Yeah.
Like,
There's no black or white. There is very shades of gray in these stories.
yeah, there's so you gotta that's the key. And they could do a despicable thing, but they're going to have you gotta give them one nice thing. Shakespeare knew that back in the late 1500s, early 1600s. It's incredible
Yeah,
how
they're
he knew that.
timeless stories, uh, for sure. One of the things that Ravenloft is notable for is a high mortality rate, a lot of death. As I mentioned, my character died. I think he had 2 hit points, maybe three, in there. And in modern Curse of Strahd in 5e, it's still there's a lot of player death. It's very notable for total party kills. In fact, something interesting, I don't know if you're aware of this, there's a very popular Discord server for Curse of Strahd, and they have a channel called the March of the Dead. And it seems to me every time I visit it on a daily basis, DMs are posting their character deaths on there. I mean, when I ran it, I had 2 character deaths in my campaign and 1 close TPK. Is this a current concern for you, or should it be concern for DMs? Should there be any adjustment or thought process in there? I know some DMs like to use some kind of plot armor to avoid character death. What's your thought about it being such a deadly game, or any adjustments to it?
It has to be deadly. If you're going to run a horror game, if
Right.
it's not deadly, it's not horrifying.
That's true. That's true.
You, Yeah,
Well,
you have to. It's there's and I've said it on my channel. I always get in trouble when I say it too. If I'll say, I hear groups that, well, we've decided no one's going to die. Well, why are you rolling dice? Why did you read 700 pages of rules?
right.
Just decide that you live, you can play that way. I wouldn't play in your game because if I'm not risking something, I wouldn't want to play it.
Yeah, risking the big stakes, right?
Yeah.
Your decisions have ultimate consequences.
Yeah.
Now, as a follow-up, one of the things that I was wrestling with when I got back into D&D in 2020, coming from those earlier editions, was a concept of balance encounters. And it seems 5e is always focusing on this balance encounter thought process, which for me, my own interpretation, balance encounters means that every fight is winnable. And I've always played, I remember when we played back before, there were situations where we had to evaluate at that moment, should we be going down that tunnel there where those noises are coming from, or should we be retreating? What's your thoughts on balancing encounters, or do you not balance encounters and just let the players make those decisions if they should push forward or retreat?
Well, I always script everything out. Like I have a monster stat block, but then I stick to the monster stat block. I don't fudge the numbers. I'm very good at estimating, how to create a formidable opponent, but I don't try to balance the encounters necessarily because first of all, if the encounters are truly balanced, they'll take forever.
That's true.
When I hear people say we play Dungeons and Dragons and for we had a fight for 2 hours, like 2 hours, like how was the victor not decided? So that's too balanced. Um, I think that it's got to be challenging, and I like a story where so you have the encounters. Imagine three fights in a typical evening session. Well, the first one's going to be easy. I'll let the players kick butt. We haven't seen each other for a while. They want to hit something. I understand that. All
Right.
right. Then we're going to have a medium challenge. Usually the villain will get away. And then you have the final challenge where you face off against the villain. Although in the case of when I run Castle Ravenloft, they had a lot of fights with Strahd, but
Oh,
that's how I do it.
that's interesting. Well, the next question here is about NPCs, and we're going to get to Strahd here in a second. But I wanted to ask about it. We touched on it briefly at the beginning of the conversation. Is there's characters, NPCs, that play significant roles in the stories, such as Irina. And one of the things I think some DMs have difficulty with is making these characters or making these characters important in the eyes of the player and the player characters, making them feeling that the player character has an emotional investment or relationship with Irina or another character to give them enough reasons to take care. Do you have any tips on how to get or an atmosphere or what to do to get players to care about certain characters rather than just saying, oh, well, I don't really care?
When I ran Ravenloft the last time, I made one of my player characters the Irina character.
Oh,
Like
really?
she's the reincarnation of Tatiana, which is what I think that Hickman would have probably have actually done. I've always meant to ask him, about that. I think that those characters are in there because they didn't want to write a romantic story like that into a module. And I don't think necessarily every player could handle that. But I have a lot of women players. So I said, all right, everyone toss a die, and whoever rolled lowest is the reincarnated version of Strahd's love. And that's how I did that.
That's that's a
So
great idea.
thanks. That's my one. That's my that's my one. I hope that was worth the price of admission.
That no,
Uh,
that's a very good idea because
when I
now
read that,
the characters definitely, the players definitely now whether they like it or not, involved in the main thread of the story.
Yeah, and it's creepy too. Like you see your player character's exact portrait,
Oh yeah.
and then the characters, if they want, they could hypnotize her or whatever, and then past lives or whatever, she'll start talking and reenacting the murder. It's like there's a lot of things you could do with that if you have players who are into role playing, and it's tough to get. Uh, it's very tough to get players to care about non-player characters. Irina is a a woman who is in need of help. Now, I have one player, Veronica, who always responds like if to a character like that. Oh, we have to help them. Like she she's got a big heart and just immediately goes to anyone who is in a position where they're helpless. But I'm blessed. Not
Right.
every group has a Veronica.
Right. Right.
Some of these people just want to go scorched earth, and it's tough to make people care about an NPC. And that's like magic. I can't with in terms of liking NPCs, all the ones that my players love are the ones that I just off the top of my head with no thought at all.
They're connected to the one that you just randomly rolled up, and meanwhile
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
written this detailed one that they don't give a shit about.
No, they don't care. It's the way it is.
Oh yes, yes. Well, getting to Strahd, he's probably the most iconic bad guy in all of D&D canon. What are some tips and suggestions do you have for running Strahd, whether it's the final conflict or first introductions? I mean, I'd love to hear your ideas about running Strahd.
The introduction of Strahd is perfect in the original module. How he's playing the organ, and they come into the room, and I think it's a mirror trick, right? Which is
Right.
brilliant because
Illusion.
it's an illusion, or maybe yeah, it's an illusion. The idea that you can't get your hands on the villain, super important. So your players can't kill the villain early on in the scenario, but that they can talk to the villain, and that's super important to be able to talk to that villain and him to articulate his evil plans and say, "You can't stop me." But then you have to have a way to get that villain out so that they can fight again. And then what Strahd does is, so at the beginning, I mentioned that, the crying baby thing. I have the baby crying because the
Right.
vampires are munching babies. So
Right.
now the party had to do what they don't like to do, but they had to split the party. Now they're split up. And then they further split up. They split up into pairs, right?
Oh
Which is
wow.
great. That's great in a horror scenarios. And Strahd would just materialize, whack, you know, punch one of them, fling one up against the wall, boom, into mist, and he's gone. And then he does it again with the other ones just when they're least expecting it. And I always played it that, he's going to attack first. He's going to be faster. There's no initiative with Strahd. He wins. He has a plus 60 initiative. You can roll your dice. You lose. He's an ancient vampire. You're not going to move faster than him. So he'll attack twice, hit the characters. They get a chance to whack him. Then the next move, he wins initiative, turns to mist. He's gone. That is a villain. That's how he has to be run. You can't get your hands on him. That's what's great about Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. The second half of it is a hunt for Dracula, and he's just always one step ahead. He's always elusive, and that is you got to have a villain who's elusive, and that's the formula. It's like he wins initiative, roll the dice. I roll in the public. You get a shot at him, but then he's missed, and he disappears. Hit and run.
So, do you have a thought process? Your party's split up there. I mean, he's coming in and doing this hit and run. He has that that layer traversing layer and the mist ability, so he could just move in and out. Do you have a thought process of like a final conflict with them, or is there this final fight, or how do you see Strahd possibly getting cornered by the party?
Probably in his coffin. Probably in the coffin, and I think there's a fake coffin in the original too. Um, it's a race against the sun, right? Too with that one. But my party, I think they fought him in the tower, and then they'd race down to his coffin because at some point they did lower his hit points, and they were like, okay, he's got to have a coffin somewhere, and they went to stake him. I don't think they actually killed him though. I think he got away.
Strahd usually gets away. He always comes. He always seems to be coming back.
But you have to have that tower fight though. Tower fights are great as long as your characters can't fly. Then just forget about it.
That's by the way, that's another spell I'm not a big fan of. Is the flying around ability. Just I like to make sure my characters can keep their feet on the ground at some point. The Fortunes of Ravenloft, the Taroka deck, which is, in my opinion, one of the most fun and interesting mechanics that's been introduced to role-playing games. In fact, by the way, I wrote a free guide. It includes the history of the Taroka deck from the first edition and different ways of including it in other games outside of Ravenloft. I'll put a link to that in the description down below. In the game, it recommends doing it randomly and randomly hiding these things. But there's a pretty good movement and argument for placing them. We're still going through the card reading, but placing these items, stacking the deck, if you will, because you might want a character to go somewhere in particular. What's your thought process on stacking the deck randomly? Any Taroka card reading thoughts?
It's a great question. So I like random things happening. I don't like to know how the venture is going to go. I want to be surprised too. If I really didn't want a random encounter to occur, I wouldn't include it. That's how you would stack the deck. I just wouldn't include whatever the encounter, the card. But I love random adventures and random elements to adventures. It's one of the best things about Ravenloft. It's what makes it replayable. So I would not alter. I like the idea of they get random cards, and I would play it through. And that's what makes it super replayable. This is the original, again, the original module.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that Taroka deck, that scene where they're getting the cards read from Madame Ava, and you're doing this kind of, tarot card reading for them, and I was just thinking you could do so much with that even beyond Ravenloft, because you can introduce quest seeds through that, or NPCs. Oh, you've got to go to the village and meet the one-eyed man that lives in the cave or whatever. I mean, it's such a really fun and interesting mechanic to introduce items, NPCs, quest seeds. That random lady or in the village, she's a card reader, or the Vistani or some group traveling on the road, and they can perform a card reading. I really think it's a really cool thing to add to a game. Ravenloft, wow. After I played, my character died. I rushed out. I remember I had some money saved. I was in high school. This has got to be 1984. Rushed out to the store and bought the module because I just loved that isometric map. I mean, we didn't get to probably 50% of that castle in my adventure. I remember as a kid just staring at that map, looking at the isometric map and wondering what it must look like in my head. I was just so fascinated from it. It is such an amazing location. It's big. It's massive. What are your thoughts on this iconic location? I mean, it's so big. I mean, it's just, I don't know. How do you feel about the location? Is there any interesting things that you think should be included in the location? Any traps or ideas that you have about Castle Ravenloft?
So when running Castle Ravenloft, I've learned to make it abstract more than concrete. First of all, there are a lot of empty rooms.
Right.
right? And so, and it's a decaying castle. So the way I do it is you pass through a number of archways, through a number of decaying rooms. The ceilings have collapsed, puddles have formed on the ground. The curtains have long since rotted away. Turning to your left, you see a door. It's slightly ajar. Beyond, you can see a four-poster bed. Do you want to go inside? That's how I do it. And
Right.
it's like, I look at it as zones,
Right.
and like the top level is a zone, the ground level is a zone, the basement and subcellar is its own zone. I don't even really look at the maps a little bit. I'll refer to, but it's not like you go 40 feet. Then there's a door.
Right.
Is the door in the northwest wall? It is in the northwest wall. Like I don't do it that way.
Um, Given there's so much canon and stuff through from first edition and second edition and third edition, do you recommend anything from those the second or third edition or from Forgotten Realms? They've really expanded on it, starting into that second edition, adding it to your campaign or expanding upon the original I6 Ravenloft.
I liked the original box set. I remember I got it, I think, for free because I went to a seminar at Gen Con when they released it, and I think Bruce Nesmith and Andrea Hade worked on it. Were there, and I maybe I won it or something. But I always like that. I mean, I think that a few other characters, if you want to liven up Ravenloft, because uh, you know, Ravenloft's got the Dr. Frankenstein type character. You can add a Wolfman character, and you can have Abbott and Costello meet Strahd. Like you could use it enough. The more times you run, if Strahd lives, they can keep going back
Right.
to the castle, and you just add another element like Universal did. Oh, now there's a Wolfman in there, and then you run it again. It's like a new thing. So some of those characters, I would. I don't know how one runs an extended campaign in Ravenloft because I always looked at it as its own little micro world with the mists. And I'm an original, originalist. I stick to the Tracy Hickman module.
Right. Well,
But
go ahead. Sorry.
no, you go.
Yeah, that was my big leap because I played I6 and then when I first ran Curse of Strahd, which is 5e, I mean they expanded. There's the village of Lockie and some political intrigue going on there. There's the old abbey. There's the temple up in the mountains, the Amber Temple, and my feeling when I read that module was I was like going, scratching my head. Like, why did Chris Perkins just leave so many holes in this thing? I mean, it seems so disjointed. I went back and read a lot of the content from the second and third edition, realizing he left a lot out. And so I ran my campaign lasted 18 months, 65 sessions. And I mean, we had a phenomenal time, played once a week, but I introduced some real world Gothic horror elements, some stuff from actual classic literature, even some Shakespeare elements to it, and really expanded the world of Barovia within the confines of what Curse of Strahd did with the land of Barovia and Castle Ravenloft. Which is really started my YouTube channel and my business by writing these guides for the expanded world of Barovia, Legends of Barovia. But I think there's so much stuff in the second and third edition canon that they just, I guess, left on the cutting room floor, which I was kind of surprised at because there was some really good stuff in there, including what you're referencing to the box set. It's just not in the modern Curse of Strahd. And that leads me to this next question. There's been this kind of, I know you know this and experiencing is the OSR Renaissance movement, but I think with the recent release of Shadow Dark, also your own role-playing game, Deathbringer, Ben's from Questing Beasts, Knave 2 now coming out. there's a lot of people, in fact, a lot of my supporters have been asking me this question. Hey, I really want to run Shadow Dark or Deathbringer or Knave 2. How do I do that? How do I use one of these new kind of OSR light hybrid light games and bring it into the world of Ravenloft or Curse of Strahd? Any suggestions if we were going to run Deathbringer, for instance, how I would use Deathbringer with Ravenloft? Is there any adjustments to the stat blocks or monster fights or things that I need to think about?
Nope. That's the good thing about it. There's nothing to, it's you got hit points, you got an armor class, and in Deathbringer in any of those games like Shadow Dark or OS Old School Essentials, your character's fourth or fifth level has 10 or 12 hit points.
Right.
Problem solved.
Problem solved.
The problem is solved.
Yeah.
That those I run Deathbringer with Ravenloft. I didn't change a thing.
Yeah, I love by the way, the luck dice. I think
Thank you.
it's a great mechanic. And for those that aren't familiar with Deathbringer, which is probably the fastest rules light, fastest characterization game out there is Deathbringer, which you can well, I'm a Patreon member, but you can also pick that up on Drive Through RPG, right? It's on Drive Through.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, now we're gonna get into. I have this question. I actually have it. Let me see. Let me look here. 5 different people asked me this question, but different questions regarding the same thing. One of the things that you're very well known for and a lot of people love is universal dungeon terrain. And you recently made a video where you made smaller versions of this. And I have a couple of my supporters, actually 5 supporters have been asking me these questions. They use your universal dungeon terrain, which works excellently, and I love it. But there's some Castle Ravenloft is complex. And there's some areas within Castle Ravenloft, and the one that comes up the most is how do I use this in the catacombs, and the other one is how do I use this like on rooftops and on the parapets in there. But I know what UDT is. Why don't you describe what UDT is to those that don't know, and how you can use that in Ravenloft?
I'll do better than that. I have one right here.
Bravo!
All right, and so this is how it works, right? So the center, imagine your characters have torches. That's the torchlight. Anything in the torchlight is melee distance. Anything here is range distance. How big is range distance? Its range distance is within the shot of a spell or a bow. It could be 10 feet, could be 30 feet. Then there's this ring, which is you hear the fight and you know it's happening, but you're not there. And you can move one range in a turn. So you can move from here to here and attack, or move here to here, or you can move 2 and just get in there and not attack. And what you do is I'm going to move the camera here.
Okay.
All right, this is okay, so that everybody can see it there. All right. You want to meet Strahd. Here he is. There's a gate from the drawbridge. There are 2. I have some evil-looking windows. There's his chair. Boom. We've got Strahd's entry chamber.
Wow.
All right, and it's that fast. You want to move up. You want to move to look. Watch this. Now it's keep the window. Keep the window. It's Strahd's library. There we go. It's Strahd's library. By the way, here there is no range distance because it's small. If we move it like that, it's bigger. There is a range distance. All right,
I get it. So you can have a big room where you could be firing arrows, but you're out of melee range, or something that you're within melee range.
Correct. It's so that's Strahd's bedroom, not bedroom. This is his study, and so there is no range. It ends here because he's so fast. He could run across any in the room and hit you, and then run back anywhere else around the room. But if you were doing a larger room, Like this is
Like the chapel.
the chapel or something like that. It could look like that. There you go.
Excellent.
And that's what it would look like. And now you're able to play more world in less space. If I was doing catacombs, I would probably, okay, let's have some pillars there. There we go. We got some doors. That's Here's the entrance. And there we go. That's what it looks like. All right. Which way do you want to go in the catacombs? If
Excellent.
you go down this hallway, I just rearrange. I put you in the middle and just put put the terrain around you. And I got a few bookcases and I got a few windows. And that's how I build Castle Ravenloft as the players experience it. Now, if you go back and you look at old Hammer horror films,
Right.
right? You must have loved them as a kid, right, Pyram?
Yes,
Like you
I
had,
did.
you
Definitely.
know, you watch those films now, right? Or Vincent Price films, and you'll see there's almost nothing in. There's like one set.
It's like watching a play, a theater set.
Yeah, they keep moving stuff around, and it's like, oh, it's the same hall, right? You
Yeah.
do the same thing. You don't have to build out this huge dungeon. Now, as for and by the way, I have nearby, right?
Right.
This is Batstrad.
Oh,
This is the female vampire that's living on the third floor, who has absolutely unlike she's just we're going to talk about her later. Fascinating NPC. But there she is. We have Strahd zombies. There they are, right? And they're off to the side. Strahd table. There we go. They're at dinner.
cool. That is
And
amazing.
that's how fast I move it around. Now for the fight on the rooftops, which is one of the reasons why you don't want your characters to fly, because fights on rooftops are always cool. You describe the rooftops. You put a tower there. You got a bridge there. Strahd is here. The door is here. All right. And the characters are going across this bridge. Bat Strahd lands on him, beats him up. All right. And the inside is the heart of Ravenloft.
That's right.
Yeah, the heart of Ravenloft. I actually have a heart. I don't have it here, but I have a little heart on a stick that goes in there, and they could fight Strahd in there.
Did you make that tower and bridge?
Yes, and you could see it on my How to Run Ravenloft in One Night video. Um, but yeah, I made these specifically for Ravenloft because you do need a couple of set pieces once in a while. If you're going to run a place iconic as Ravenloft, you probably should have a tower,
Right.
and there probably should be some sort of bridge. And you just say to the players, if you fall off, you fall into the mist, you're dead.
That
And
that's awesome.
then it goes away. And now, look, you're in the basement again. And that's really how I run. Yeah, here we go. Now you're in the basement again. Which way do you want to go? Or you're in the kitchen, with those evil zombie cooks, which is one of my favorite NPCs. But that's how I run Ravenloft. And now, I wish I had the small. You're talking about the Dungeons of IKEA UDT where it's
Right.
super small. But that's the thing. People have asked, well, can I have a 24-inch, UDT? And the thing is, the size doesn't really matter because this ring, the Dungeons of IKEA one that's really small, the middle circle is only slightly smaller than this one. It's the second ring that's thinner. And there's right.
Right.
So it's abstract. Again, this is all you have to do is put characters here and they're at range distance. Where are they in exact positions? We don't have to worry about that. You're at range distance. So that is how I do Castle Ravenloft.
That's awesome. I think. I mean, I think you could actually make these things and just sell them. There's so many people that I know that just love the UDT concept. They have their miniatures, but nobody wants to carry. Setting up a huge scene can take a long, long time. So that just works so well.
And I want to say too, before I forget, you don't need a ton of pieces. You need the right pieces. You need a couple of pillars like this chair. What a great chair. This is I think it might be Mantic makes this. But this is so awesome. It's so evocative in and of itself. It tells a little story and your mind fills in the rest. Same thing with like those windows. Where are those windows? Now I can't. Oh, they're here. They're right. They're right. I made these tall windows and they evoke, Gothic windows.
Right.
And that's what you want.
They could be in the chapel, or they could be in the hall, or in multiple locations, and really pull you in and help you emerge into that
Yeah, exactly.
experience.
So thanks for playing with me.
I would love to be there right now, and now I want to play. That's just so awesome. You mentioned the female NPC vampire.
Yeah, there are two great NPCs in Ravenloft. There's the cook who's disemboweled, and I think he's cooking his own guts. That's really cool. But what's really funny is Claude Caldwell obviously was influenced by Hammer horror films.
Right.
This is his signature, by the way. That's
Oh
Claude's
wow.
signature. And you have these voluptuous women,
All right.
with a very Christopher Lee looking Strahd. And the thing about Hammer horror films, is the women are, there's they look like that. So the female vampire in the original um, module, it's like even in Dracula, I mean, they're concubines. That's what
Yes.
they are. I
Yes.
mean, Bram Stoker is calling them concubines in like 1890.
That's right.
But in 1983, the climate was such that like, oh, in the top floor is is Strahd's friend.
Strahd's
But
friend. Right.
it's like she's obviously his slave, but they couldn't write that in the module.
Right.
And so that's the other thing. It's Gothic without really being Gothic. And part of the tradition this comes from is it's completely no sex in it. It's not even implied sexual, you
Right.
know. Strahd does not apparently have those desires. And it's just really funny to see them right around. It's female vampire. It's just so funny. Like they couldn't go there. And it's like 100 years after. And the 80s were more repressive than that. And even today, I don't know if they do that.
No, I think they went through and scrubbed it again, for political correctness. Uh, I mean, I get it, but I also feel that it's unfortunate. I hope they never scrub Shakespeare's work. Um, and I mean, I've read a lot of Shakespeare, and he introduced some very, patricide, suicide. I think in The Tempest, there's actually, references to rape. I mean, just all these real world, unfortunate, horrible things, which I always find fascinating. I think it kind of it exists in Ravenloft with Strahd as well. Is that you don't need to show these things happening, but these things happening, whether it's a murder of a family member or a suicide, is what shapes these characters' morality in and steers their compass, and also gives them this reason for doing the things that they are. It's molded these people from these tragic events that they've either been directly impacted by or surrounded with, the death of the suicide, death of Tatiana. That's he's crazily in love with her, trying to find her for over the centuries, and I'm sure he's carved a path, a swath through many, many women that he has turned into vampires to fulfill that hole in his heart for Tatiana. So
Hmm.
it's just a fascinating story. I really appreciate the time that you've taken today giving us your insight, especially sharing the UDT on the screen, which I think is just awesome. Um, and your thoughts on Ravenloft, I really appreciate it. Do you have any closing thoughts on Gothic Core you want to share with us?
No, but I do have one more UDT question that comes up. Someone's going to ask it.
Okay.
This is what they're going to say. If I'm here, this comes up all the time. Well, if I'm here at range distance and Strahd moves to me, what happens? And the answer is you're in melee distance now. And
Yep.
also, people ask, well, what happens if I go over here? And the answer is off screen, you're rendered apart by monsters because you've left the party. You're so far away, they don't know where you are. Monsters surround you and feed on you, and you're dead. So that is you can't be alone. That's my final thing with Gothic horror. It's that fear of being alone. You have to make the players be afraid to be alone.
Yeah, definitely true. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your ideas, answering our community's questions about running Ravenloft and Gothic Core, and presenting us with some examples with UDT. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Until next time, this is Pyram King signing off, and may all your rolls be criticals. Or as Professor Dungeon Master says,
May all your rolls be 20s.
see you later, everyone.